Good evening and welcome to NTD News. I'm Stephania Cox. Here are today's top stories. President Biden is imposing new sanctions on Russia and expelling 10 Russian diplomats. He says the sanctions have to do with the Solar Winds breach last year. Human smugglers armed with AR-15s are crossing through ranchers' properties in Texas. Locals say they've never seen what's taking place before, and ranchers say they're scared for their families to go outside. Can an officer mix up their gun for their taser? We speak to a former law enforcement officer on what may have happened in the Daunte Wright case and about the impact defunding the police could have on citizens. What can the U.S. do to counter the Chinese Communist Party's economic ambitions? A former Trump official says the best tool is America's core values. And Jeff Bezos' rocket just had its 15th test launch in Texas. It's supposed to be a competitor for Elon Musk's SpaceX. The Biden administration imposes new sanctions on Russia. They're in response to alleged cyber attacks and interference in the 2020 election. Biden says he's prepared to take further action if Russia continues to interfere with U.S. democracy. NTD's Jason Perry has more.
President Biden signed an executive order Thursday bringing new sanctions against Russia. This comes in part in retaliation for the Solar Winds breach in which hackers gained access to the networks of at least 9 U.S. government agencies.
When President Putin called me in January after I was sworn in to congratulate me, I told him that my administration would be looking very carefully, now that we had access to all the data, and at the issues to assess Russia's role and then determine what response we would make. When we spoke again this week, I told them that we would shortly be responding in a measured and a proportionate way because we had concluded that they had interfered in the election and Solar Winds was totally out of the inappropriate.
The White House says the sanctions are also in response to Russian interference in the 2020 presidential election, among a host of other actions that sought to harm the U.S.
And because elections are sacred, they're sovereign undertakings, and they're an expression of the will of the American people. And we cannot allow a foreign power to interfere in our democratic process with impunity. And I told them if it turned out that as I thought, that there was engagement in our elections, that I'd respond.
The White House also announced the expulsion of 10 Russian diplomats. Press Secretary Jen Psaki comments on the move.
Our objective here is not to escalate. Our objective here is to impose costs for what we feel are unacceptable actions by the Russian government.
Russia's foreign ministry spokeswoman said such aggressive behavior will undoubtedly trigger a resolute retaliation. Senator Lindsey Graham supports the sanctions against Russia.
I applaud the Biden administration. I think this is a good step. Keep it up. But Nord Stream 2 needs to be in the mix.
Nord Stream 2 is an offshore pipeline currently under construction that would allow Russian gas exports to bypass Ukraine and other countries in the region. This is the second set of sanctions the Biden administration placed on Russia since taking office. The first round came after the poisoning of Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny. The White House had previously invited President Putin to a climate change conference to be held at the end of the month, but it is unknown if he will attend. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Democratic legislators introduced a bill today that would add 4 seats to the U.S. Supreme Court. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says while she's not ruling out the expansion, for now she will not bring the bill to a vote. But House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy says the Democrats' proposal should scare every single American.
Democrats in both chambers of Congress Thursday unveiled legislation that would expand the U.S. Supreme Court. The bill seeks to increase the number of seats on the High Court from the current 9 to 13. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says she's not committing to bringing the bill to a vote. She said expanding the Supreme Court could happen, but should be studied first.
I don't know that that's a good idea or a bad idea. I think it's an idea that should be considered, and I think the president's taken the right approach to have a commission to study such a thing. It's a big step. It's not out of the question. It has been done before. in the history of our country a long time ago.
Republicans note that Congress rejected the last presidential effort at expansion by Democrat Franklin D. Roosevelt. In an interview with Fox Business Thursday, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy argued that the Democrats' proposal to add 4 seats to the court should scare every single American, regardless of where they stand politically. At his weekly press conference, McCarthy said he never believed Democrats would go this far.
Ironically, it's the same number needed to give Democrats a 1-seat edge and the President Biden the power to appoint 4 justices. Never in my time in politics did I ever believe they would go this far.
President Biden signed an executive order last week establishing a 36-member commission to study possible reforms to the Supreme Court, including expansion.
A bipartisan group of 30 Congress members want to repeal a Trump-era cap on state and local tax deductions. Biden's proposed tax hike to pay for his infrastructure plan gives them some leverage. NTD's Melina Weisskopf has a story.
Congress members wants to use the opportunity to repeal the cap for SALT, or state and local tax deductions.
You know, I've said before, no salt, no deal. Josh says no salt, no dice. Billy says a lot of things. So we all, we're all saying that this has to be part of the conversation.
New Jersey Congressman Josh Gottheimer said people are leaving his state because the taxes are too high. That's why he wants to repeal the Trump-era $10,000 cap on state and local tax deductions.
It's an effort by the federal government to compel voters in states like New Jersey, New York, and California to choose different policies.
He, along with several other caucus members, sent a letter to Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen calling for a SALT cap repeal to be a part of Biden's broader tax and infrastructure plans.
I am open to ambitious revenue raising as part of these bills. If it affects the individual taxes of my constituents, we've got to address SALT as part of that effort.
Some Republicans are joining Democrats in this effort, but urge high-tax states to hold the line taxing their citizens.
But it's not a license for the local municipalities in the states to continue to increase their taxes and abuse the people that they represent. Thank you very much.
Maliotakis said New York City's property tax levy increased over 50% in the past few years.
Well, I was one of the first original advocates of the property tax cap because at Long Island the taxes are so high and all of New York State they're very high.
Saying he'd support state legislation in New York to cap the New York City property tax. People living in high-tax states and who fall within the middle to upper-income classes have been hit the hardest by the SALT cap. And now Biden plans to raise taxes for high-income earners, particularly those making over $400,000 a year. That means middle to upper-income class people could be further impacted by Biden's tax plan if the SALT cap isn't repealed.
So it's clear the Biden administration is going to have to put in a significant amount of effort to negotiate with members of this SALT caucus in order for Congress to write a solid piece of legislation on infrastructure that can actually pass through the House and through the Senate. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
House Judiciary Committee approved legislation on Wednesday night to form a commission that will look into reparations for the descendants of slaves. If approved, the bill will create a commission to study the history of slavery in the U.S. and its colonies from 1619 to 1865. It would also analyze discrimination against the descendants of African slaves and recommend remedies, including financial compensation. After a lengthy debate on Wednesday, the House Judiciary Committee voted 25-17 in favor of the bill. The legislation was first introduced nearly 30 years ago. It's been revived by Texas Representative Sheila Jackson Lee and joined by almost 180 co-sponsors. Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler describes the bill as historic legislation, but Texas Republican Chip Roy says he's afraid this kind of legislation takes the U.S. further away from the important dream of judging people by their content of their character and not by the color of their skin. The bill has not been advanced to a full House vote, but President Biden has indicated his support. Ranchers in Texas are dealing with human smugglers armed with semi-automatic rifles crossing through their properties. Ranchers say they're scared to go outside, and law enforcement tells them that when they do, they need to be armed themselves. Two heavily armed suspected smugglers with a car full of illegal immigrants drive down a dirt road to hand their cargo to the next vehicle. One films the bumpy ride with a camera in one hand and points an AR-15 with a drum magazine at the windshield with the other hand. The illegal immigrants can be seen cowering in the back of the car. The driver is heard communicating over a radio announcing he's at the location. Suddenly, the vehicle arrives at a gate. A pickup truck is waiting on the other side. The two suspected smugglers yell to their cargo of illegal immigrants to run. The backseat passengers flee from the vehicle and swiftly jump over the fence into their next ride. These events took place in Jim Hogg County, Texas, around 70 miles north of the border. Ranchers have long dealt with illegal immigrants crossing through their lands to evade capture. The trespassers leave gates open, causing livestock to mix or get free. They destroy fences and gates. They light fires. They break into properties and steal possessions along the way. But Susan Kibbe, executive director of the South Texas Property Rights Association, says there's something different about today's human smugglers and the illegal immigrants seeking to evade capture. The smugglers are armed, and the illegal immigrants are often convicted criminals. Kibbe told the Epoch Times the situation is disturbing.
It's very disturbing when you have smugglers that have connection with the cartels and on U.S. soil carrying high-powered semi-automatic rifles.
Kibbe obtained this video from law enforcement after the smugglers posted it on TikTok. She said federal and local law enforcement are advising landowners to carry firearms on their own properties to protect themselves. Scott Frazier, a Texas Farm Bureau board member, says the smugglers have become a lot more militant. Speaking at a roundtable with GOP Congress members last week, he said, "You're kind of scared of them. You're kind of scared to be out on these ranches by yourself nowadays. Definitely scared to have your family here." Kibbe's association was formed in 2006 in response to border security issues. She says problems with illegal immigrants and smuggling have always existed, but not to this extent.
There's areas of Texas that have never experienced this before, and like in the Del Rio Border Patrol sector, they're getting overrun and they don't have the infrastructure that the RGB sector has. It's a massive increase, and it pretty much aligns with the election and then the inauguration.
Kibbe's association is trying to help bring back Trump-era policies such as Remain in Mexico. That rule kept immigrants outside the border while their immigration applications were processed. As growing numbers of unaccompanied minors sweep across the U.S. southern border, the Biden administration is reaching out to states to house them. But South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem and some other Republican governors are saying no.
Noem wrote on Twitter, "South Dakota won't be taking any illegal immigrants that the Biden administration wants to relocate." She made the statement as the Biden administration scrambles to house the surge of unaccompanied minors coming across the border. The number of them crossing the border more than doubled from February to March. There are almost 20,000 per month now. Media reports say the administration is reaching out to numerous states for help in housing the minors. The Washington Post reports that the administration is considering flying migrant families and children to states near the Canadian border. The Federal Emergency Management Agency is now involved.
We want to be able to help out HHS with setting up shelter capacity for the children.
Noem joins her fellow Republican governors of South Carolina, Nebraska, and Iowa. They've all declined requests to take in illegal immigrants. South Carolina Governor Henry McMaster signed an executive order to prioritize children from his state. It prevents the migrant children from placement in the state's residential and foster care system. Republicans blame President Joe Biden for causing the crisis. Biden says the influx is a normal seasonal pattern. He says it happens every winter. Though other administration officials have contradicted the president. Cindy Huang directs HHS's Office of Refugee Resettlement. She says the problem is going to get more severe.
Following the police shooting of 20-year-old Daunte Wright, some are calling to disarm the police. NTD's Christina Kim speaks with a veteran law enforcement officer about what might happen if police are stripped of their weapons.
Former Officer Kim Potter shot Daunte Wright after screaming taser 3 times.
She obviously, from the video, thinks that her taser is in her hand, not her firearm. And so then we have the shooting.
But many are wondering, how can an officer confuse a gun for a taser? Sergeant Betsy Brantner-Smith, a 29-year veteran in law enforcement, says this can happen in high-stress situations. An expert on police psychology calls this error slip and capture. Under stress, officers sometimes do exactly the opposite of what they intend. According to protocol, the tasers are on officers' non-dominant side, and the service weapons are kept on their dominant side. But officers are trained to draw their handgun more often than stun guns, and their training might take over in high-pressure situations. This mix-up has reportedly happened 16 times in the U.S. since 2001. Brooklyn Center Mayor Mike Elliott suggested officers don't need to be armed with weapons at traffic stops. Smith pushes back against this, saying the mayor doesn't understand policing. For example, one officer in New Mexico was shot in the head during a routine traffic stop before he could even grab for his own gun.
I can guarantee you that you will not find a police officer in the United States who is willing to conduct a traffic stop without having a firearm available.
As for calls to abolish or defund the police, Smith says ultimately it's not police officers who pay the price.
You're hurting ultimately the citizens. And who does it hurt the most? People who live in poorer areas who can't afford good locks, they can't afford private security. They live in areas where they need the police, and the police are not going to be available.
Smith says anti-police sentiment will make officers less willing to engage in dangerous situations. A report from the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund shows that after the death of George Floyd, the number of arrests decreased by 42% and murders rose 64% in Minneapolis. Christina Kim, NTD News.
Former Vice President Mike Pence has received a pacemaker. That's according to a spokesman who said Pence is expected to have a full recovery. Pence had a routine surgery on Wednesday to have the heart pacemaker device implanted. He previously disclosed he had a heart condition. The former VP had the procedure done at a medical facility just outside of D.C. According to a spokesman, Pence had symptoms associated with a slow heart rate over the past 2 weeks. Pence thanked the doctors, nurses, and staff for their swiftness and professionalism. And according to a statement from his office, Pence is set to return to normal activities in the coming days. And if you want to hit the books, you might have to get a shot against COVID-19 first. Several universities say they'll make it a requirement this fall. NTD's Miguel Moreno has that story and a legal take on the issue.
Rutgers University in New Jersey was the first. Now Brown, Cornell, Northeastern, and others say they intend to require students to be vaccinated against COVID-19 before returning to campus this fall. Virginia Tech, for one, reportedly said that they can't legally require it because the available vaccines are for emergency use only. Then there's the issue of religious exemptions.
Some are saying that they'll allow for religious exemptions, but I've also read that they don't have to. To what extent can universities require that their students be vaccinated for COVID-19, against COVID-19?
Yeah, so it's a great question. It's obviously one that's very timely. The schools that I've heard of so far that are having requirements are having religious exemptions. I've at least seen the reports. The ones I've seen do say they will have religion and disability type of exemptions. Whether that's legally required in a lot of places will vary based on whether you're dealing with a private institution or a government-run institution. Historically, generally speaking, we have vaccine mandates in this country. We do have religious exemptions. So most of the vaccine mandates to attend grammar school and lower schools, for example, I think 45 or 46 states have religious exemptions built in. So that's certainly the norm.
The National Conference of State Legislatures says 45 states plus Washington grant religious and/or philosophical exemptions. Some of the few that don't, New York, Mississippi, and California. Rienzi says he doesn't see a legal problem with universities requiring vaccinations if they allow for religious exemptions, but it's a different story if a government suddenly mandates them and prohibits these exemptions.
If the government were to move to having a mandate for a COVID vaccine, which they don't have yet, and then if they were to take that additional step of saying no religious exemption, then the government would basically need to be able to prove that there's a really good reason that they need to do that, and that they can't function the way we have for all the other vaccines.
Dartmouth College told AP that they can't decide on whether to require these vaccinations yet, at least not until they become accessible to all students. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
This Friday, Japan's Prime Minister will become the first foreign leader President Biden hosts at the White House. American East Asia expert Michael Green says the two countries' strategies toward China are well aligned.
On Friday, President Biden will host a summit with Japanese Prime Minister Suga at the White House. This will be the first in-person leaders summit since Biden took office. The China challenge is at the top of their agenda. Former National Security Council official Michael Green believes that the U.S. and Japan are quite well aligned when it comes to basic strategy toward China. But there are some differences.
The Biden administration, I think, is concerned at how aggressive China has been and how much ground the U.S. has lost in recent years in Asia and wants to catch up quickly. I think the Japanese view is that they have had a strategy in place and they want to move forward steady as she goes, free and open Indo-Pacific, enhancing deterrence incrementally.
The Chinese regime's increasingly aggressive moves have raised grave concerns in the Indo-Pacific region, including the security challenges in the Taiwan Strait. It's still unclear if Biden and Suga will show their support for Taiwan in the joint statement.
Whether there's a statement or not, there will be joint exercises and operational plans. I think that's clearly where the alliance is heading.
According to the Japan Times, Biden and Suga will express their deep concerns over Beijing's human rights violations in the summit joint statement, including the situation in Hong Kong and the Uyghur minority in Xinjiang. This is seen as an important step by Japan in a new era.
The Japanese government and the Japanese people clearly recognize how important democratic norms, good governance, and human rights are in the context of China's ambitions to define the region as, more aligned with their authoritarian vision.
Prime Minister Suga is planning to visit India and the Philippines later this month. It's seen as part of Japan's overall strategy to deter Beijing.
What can the U.S. do to counter the Chinese Communist Party's economic ambitions? A former Trump official says the best tool at our disposal is America's core values. NTD's Lin Lin has the details.
Former Deputy National Security Advisor Matthew Pottinger is telling a congressional commission on China that among the Trump administration's hundreds of actions against Beijing, the one that upset Beijing the most is that we called them out publicly for crimes against humanity and genocide of its own people. He urges Congress to use every opportunity to speak out about what Americans stand for and who we stand up for.
The one thing that the Communist Party cannot weaponize effectively is what it stands for, because the only thing it stands for is its own power. So we must never, ever neglect the advantage that our values provide us in this fight.
Pottinger says by taking advantage of Western capital, the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, is exploiting the global free market system in many ways. He believes Wall Street must confront the reality that Beijing is waging an existential fight against the free world.
So it's not too much to ask to require American index funds and university endowments, pensions, and venture capital firms to stop funding the expansion of the Chinese empire.
Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's China policy advisor Miles Yu also testified. He says every American should understand that communist China is a communist dictatorship ruled by a Marxist-Leninist party.
The economic challenge of the Chinese Communist Party is not a matter of if we should or should not change Beijing's paradoxical economic reality. It is a matter of if we don't change its behavior, the free world will be changed by Beijing.
Yu warns that the CCP amounts to the most serious challenge to the free world since the Cold War. Lin Lin, NTD News, Washington, D.C.
Coming up, Jeff Bezos' rocket just had its 15th test launch in Texas. It's supposed to be a competitor for Elon Musk's SpaceX. And visitors and tourists enjoy vibrant colors at the Washington State Tulip Festival. The Skagit Valley is the U.S.'s largest producer of commercial tulips. Stay tuned to find out more. Amazon founder Jeff Bezos has made significant progress on his space project. A rocket from his company, Blue Origin, made a successful takeoff and landing on its 15th test flight.
Launching from West Texas on Wednesday, the new Shepard NS-15 rocket had a successful test flight. The rocket is owned by Blue Origin, a private spaceflight company started by Amazon founder Jeff Bezos. It was the rocket's 15th launch. The previous 14 flights were also successful. During the flight, the rocket reached a velocity over 1,700 miles per hour. It flew to the edge of space before making a smooth vertical landing with the help of 3 parachutes. Blue Origin is a competitor to Elon Musk's SpaceX and reportedly has fallen far behind on orbital transportation. It lost out on billions of dollars of contracts to SpaceX and the United Launch Alliance. Blue Origin is now battling to develop a lunar lander in a push to return humans to the moon in a few years.
A robotic dog is now patrolling New York City streets. But will it actually make residents safer? NTD's Arian Pasdar has the story.
The police here in the Big Apple are testing out a robot dog. It uses artificial intelligence to get around. Now it also has cameras which act as an extra pair of eyes for the NYPD. That feature can be used for hostage situations, which is what robots are usually used for in New York. The dog cost the NYPD over $70,000. Critics of the dog say the AI program might target minorities and innocent people. According to one expert, that might indeed happen. But an even bigger threat is the rise of smart cities, where everything is connected and watched via voice and facial recognition.
Then corporations and businesses or any governments can bring on a new age of surveillance and potential tyranny for the world's people.
He added that another point of concern is that those systems would be owned and used by the government rather than the people themselves. So the people should be taught about them sufficiently before they are released on a wide scale.
Make sure these are assessed and people know of it before we get into the age. Because once the machines come in, the AI system comes in, it's too late.
Right now, the NYPD's dog is only in its testing phase. But according to Mr. Parsa, the systems might work well in the testing phase, but after thousands of them are implemented on a wide scale, problems might start to arise. Arian Pasdar, NTD News, New York.
Tens of thousands of people are expected to renew the annual Memorial Day motorcycle ride in Washington, D.C. next month to raise awareness of veteran issues. This ride, known as the Rolling Thunder, has been going for over 30 years, but it was stopped for the last 2 years and is now under a new name, Rolling to Remember.
Rolling to Remember, the Memorial Day motorcycle ride is set to return to D.C. next month after being stopped for the last 2 years. During the ride, military veteran advocates come together, calling on government to continue searching for soldiers missing in action.
We want them to understand that many Americans care about this issue and that we demand action.
The organizer says this is the world's largest one-day motorcycle event. He expects more than 20,000 people joining in this year. Nationwide riders are encouraged to participate free of charge. People who do not have motorcycles are also welcome to show their support.
Many of those who come out are Gold Star families, meaning they've lost somebody in combat. Many of them are family members of prisoners of war and of those 80,000 who are still missing in action.
This year's ride faces new challenges with the pandemic going on. The Pentagon has not approved the request to access their parking lot, which was previously used as a staging area. The rally in front of the Lincoln Memorial is canceled over social distancing concerns, but the event is already approved by the National Park Service officials, Department of Transportation officials, and local law enforcement agencies. Lin Lin, NTD News, Washington, D.C.
Coming up, trucking companies rush to hire more drivers to meet demand. Some are raising drivers' wages as much as 40%. And entrepreneurs in New York City defeat the odds with new business models. They see great opportunities in the empty storefronts out on the market. Find out more in just a moment on NTD News.
Do you have a life insurance policy you no longer need? Now you can sell your policy, even a term policy, for an immediate cash payment. Call Coventry Direct to learn more.
We thought we had planned carefully for our retirement.
But we quickly realized we needed a way to supplement our income.
Our friends sold their policy to help pay their medical bills. And that got me thinking. Maybe selling our policy could help with our retirement.
I was skeptical, so I did some research and called Coventry Direct. They explained life insurance is a valuable asset that can be sold.
We learned we could sell all of our policy or keep part of it with no future payments. Who knew? We sold our policy. Now we can relax and enjoy our retirement as we had planned.
If you have $100,000 or more of life insurance, you may qualify to sell your policy. Don't cancel or let your policy lapse without finding out what it's worth. Visit CoventryDirect.com to find out if your policy qualifies or call 1-800-509-8500. Coventry Direct, redefining insurance.
90% of news outlets in the United States are controlled by 6 corporations. They're not out to tell you the truth of what's happening. They're out to tell you the picture of the world that they represent. The mission of the Epoch Times is to chase the truth, to ground all statements in facts, and prevent people from being misled. This is a battle between truth and deceit. Subscribe today and join the Americans who are seeking truth and tradition. We'd love to have you on board.
With retail sales up so much, who's going to deliver everything? Trucking companies are struggling to find workers to keep up with demand, so now they're offering more money. NTD's Colin Frederickson reports.
Trucking companies rushing to hire drivers as demand surges, and many are doing it by raising pay.
Overall pay for drivers has gone up about, from what I understand, about 15% in the last year or so.
The Bureau of Labor Statistics says truck driver median pay was over $47,000 in 2020. That's expected to rise as the lockdowns fade.
It's always been an issue that has been in the industry. It's common. One of the big issues is wages, and we're starting to see some of the companies increase wages in totality.
Knight-Swift Transportation Holdings, the largest truckload carrier in North America, says its pay recently rose by 40%. Meanwhile, Crete Carrier says its pay raises will place 50% of its drivers' average pay at almost $90,000. Another big company, Yellow Corp, recently hired around 2,000 drivers and recently said it plans on opening 12 new academies.
Between March and April of last year, nearly 100,000 driver jobs were shed. During a downturn, you get rid of the drivers you don't need. So when the economy ultimately inflects upward, you have to start that process of finding drivers again.
Experts expect pandemic aid and COVID vaccinations to fuel driver demand. Colin Frederickson, NTD News.
576,000 new jobless claims last week. Shockingly high, but actually the lowest since the pandemic began. Retail sales were hotter in March too, no doubt helped by the latest round of stimulus checks. NTD's Arlene Richards has the details.
Latest data shows fewer workers losing their jobs, Americans eager to spend more, and corporate profits getting fatter. On the jobs front, the Labor Department says the number of Americans filing for unemployment for the first time fell last week to 576,000. That's a new post-pandemic low and a sharp drop from the 700,000-plus level they had been stuck at for months. The drop in jobless claims coincides with a strong uptick in retail sales, painting a picture of Americans increasingly willing to shop, eat out, and otherwise spend again as the economy reopens. Sales at stores, car dealers, and restaurants jumped 9.8% in March. It's the biggest gain since retail sales surged by 18% last May. Strong retail sales are a big boost for the U.S. economy, which is mostly driven by consumer spending. Optimism was further lifted by upbeat quarterly earnings. Economic growth is expected to top 7% this year, which would be the fastest since 1984. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
Coming up, a major sandstorm is raging through Beijing. The air quality index there is more than 3 times the limit of what's considered safe. And Chinese regulators slap $70 million fine on a major video streaming platform. It involves the company's decade-long financial fraud. That and more here on NTD News. A major video streaming platform in China is facing an over $70 million fine. The company's founder has also been barred for life from trading in the securities market. NTD's Tiffany Meyer brings us more.
A major Chinese video streaming provider is being fined for decades worth of fraud. Leshi Internet Information and Technology has been fined more than $70 million by regulators. Its founder, Jia Yeting, is also facing the same penalty. The punishments were doled out because of financial fraud committed from 2007 to 2016. Jia is also barred for life from trading in the securities market. China's Securities Regulatory Commission announced the penalty earlier this week. The company charged with falsifying earnings and misreporting facts in its initial public offering or IPO documents. Regulators started probing the company in April of 2019. That's after the company disclosed Jia, its biggest shareholder, was suspected of violating financial disclosure laws. The company first started trading on a technology board for Chinese startups back in 2010, part of the Shenzhen Stock Exchange. And according to the company, the $74 million penalty represents 5% of the funds raised in its IPO. Yellow skies descended on Beijing Thursday as a sandstorm raged through the city. A giant cloud of sand and dust particles rolled into the area, carried by strong winds from northern China. City authorities say Beijing's air quality index rose to over 320 Thursday afternoon. That's more than 3 times the limit of what's considered safe. Online, Beijing citizens described the storm. One wrote, "In the morning, the sun was still shining and the sky was clear. But by the afternoon, it suddenly looked like the end of the world in Beijing." Beijing's meteorological observatory predicts strong winds over the next 3 days, accompanied by dust and thunderstorms. Most of northern China has felt the impacts of the sandstorm. Chinese authorities say the pollutants come from Mongolia and the Chinese region of Inner Mongolia. Forecasters say high winds will carry them into central and eastern China by Friday.
Beijing is condemning Japan over a decision to discharge radioactive wastewater into the ocean. But now China is found to have been doing exactly the same thing. Here are the details.
The Japanese government plans to release treated wastewater from the destroyed Fukushima nuclear power plant to the Pacific Ocean. The radioactive water discharge is scheduled for 2 years from now. Japanese authorities have reassured the public that the treated and diluted water will be decontaminated to a safe level. But the decision is still sparking opposition from neighboring countries. The main concern is that the treated waste will contain tritium, a radioactive substance. China has been among the most vocal in opposing the decision. It's also urging the U.S. to stay impartial on the issue. China's foreign ministry strongly condemned Japan on Tuesday, calling the decision extremely irresponsible and saying it may take action in response. Yet new information has exposed Beijing's apparent hypocrisy on the issue. According to media outlet Hong Kong Citizen News, every one of China's 49 existing nuclear power units were found to dump nuclear wastewater into the ocean. One of them, the Daya Bay Nuclear Power Station, is just 30 miles from Hong Kong. It's responsible for releasing 10 times more tritium as Japan's Fukushima. As of the end of last year, there are 16 total nuclear power plants in China, with 49 nuclear power units in operation.
Over to Europe. The Royal College of Surgeons of England says it's been 5 years since the country's National Health Service last met the 18-week waiting times target. They say investment on a scale last seen in the 2000s is needed. The British Prime Minister says the government will do whatever it takes to help the NHS beat the backlog. NTD's Neil Woodrow brings us more.
The government set the waiting time standard in 2004. It says that no one should have to wait longer than 18 weeks from GP referral to hospital treatment. It's part of the NHS constitution, and trusts continue to report performance against it monthly. But according to NHS data, the waiting list for hospital treatment is now 4.7 million, the highest since records began in 2007. And almost 400,000 patients have now been waiting over a year. This compares to about 1,600 people waiting over a year in February 2020. Prime Minister Boris Johnson commented.
This is a real priority now for our country. 4.7 million people on waiting lists. Of course, it's been exacerbated. It's been made worse by COVID. People, I don't think, have been going to hospital, haven't been going to use medical facilities in the way that they might have been throughout the pandemic.
The Vice President of the Royal College of Surgeons of England says the symptoms were there even before the pandemic, but the problem has now become chronic and needs long-term treatment. NHS England introduced a zero tolerance of any referral to treatment waits of more than 52 weeks in 2013-14. Cancer Research UK says urgent cancer referrals dropped in February by 8% on February 2020, and the data also shows a 6% reduction in the number of patients starting cancer treatment compared with February 2020. Kruti Shrotri of Cancer Research UK says while it's positive that urgent cancer referrals didn't plummet like they did in the first wave, these February figures show the cancer backlog continues to build. Johnson says the government will do whatever it takes to provide the NHS with the funding it needs to beat the backlog. COVID-19 continues to affect us all in so many ways, for some more than others. Neil Woodrow, NTD News, Epsom, Surrey.
NATO is concerned over a buildup of Russian troops near the Ukrainian border. After an emergency meeting on Wednesday, the alliance is calling for de-escalation. Moscow says the buildup is in response to NATO threats.
The head of NATO on Wednesday called on Russia to pull back troops near Ukraine's border.
Allies fully support Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and we call on Russia to de-escalate immediately, stop its pattern of aggressive provocations, and respect its international commitments.
He was speaking after an emergency meeting of NATO foreign and defense ministers. NATO says the number of Russian troops massed on Ukraine's borders is the highest since 2014. Additionally, fighting has increased in recent weeks in eastern Ukraine. Government forces there have battled Russian-backed separatists in a 7-year conflict that Kiev says has killed 14,000 people. NATO is also concerned about Russia's troop buildup in Crimea. Russia annexed the peninsula from Ukraine in 2014. Ukraine's defense minister on Wednesday accused Russia of preparing to potentially store nuclear weapons in Crimea. US President Joe Biden called Russian President Vladimir Putin on Tuesday to propose a meeting of the estranged leaders. Ukraine's ambassador to the UK on Wednesday said he welcomed Biden's move and says he doesn't know Putin's motivation.
We don't know how far he's eager to go, what his internal position is, what his internal politics dynamics is dictating him. We just hope that with enough resolve and posture, we can tell him that's not easy, low-hanging fruit. He has to take advantage of it.
He's hopeful that the joint efforts will be able to avert a war. 2 U.S. warships are due to arrive in the Black Sea this week. Russia warned Washington to stay away from Crimea. Moscow says the buildup is a 3-week snap military drill to test combat readiness in response to what it calls threatening behavior from NATO.
Coming up, ancient Rome's gladiators are now back in a new exhibition in Naples, Italy. It shows their day-to-day life and more. Many children across the globe continue to attend school remotely. In Italy, a 4th grader takes her classes on a hillside accompanied by goats. Find out more here on NTD News. One of the largest tulip festivals in the world is underway in Washington state. Our reporter went to colorful fields to see who was out enjoying the flowers.
Every April, millions of tulips burst into bloom in Washington's Skagit Valley. Acre after acre of brightly colored tulips bring in hundreds of thousands of visitors to celebrate in a month-long festival.
Andrew Miller is one of the men responsible for brightening the tourists' day.
Flowers are personal, but there's nothing more personal than tulips. Everybody has a story. Everyone who comes out here has a story about tulips. They have memories, they have associations and connections.
To Miller, tulips are more than just flowers.
To me, it really represents spring and hope and new opportunities, I think, especially this year.
And with so many meaningful flowers, tourists will want to capture the moment.
I woke up and I said to myself, like, it's time to go somewhere and enjoy the sunshine.
Velichko, an immigrant from Ukraine, is also wowed by Washington State's environment.
Yes, I really like it. I mean, I like this state. The nature here is like beautiful.
And with families on vacation, there is no shortage of children.
It is a great place, and I hope that this summer, that summer will make it even better.
The festival offers a wide range of entertainment.
It's because it has all these beautiful flowers that I've never seen before. They have new structures which you can have pictures with. Loads of nice structures. Everyone will love it. The best part of this whole place is the tractor ride, gotta say. Yeah, it was pretty fun. I was kind of scared that we were gonna crash, but it didn't happen.
With so much fun, it can be hard to even choose one's favorite flower.
And my favorite tulips in this whole entire tulip festival are the tulips.
The Skagit Valley is the largest commercial producer of tulips in the United States. By volume, it is second only to the Netherlands. Echo Liu and Daniel Hall, NTD News, Washington.
You might only know them from the movies, but ancient Rome's gladiators are now back in a new exhibition in Naples, Italy. NTD's Arian Pazdar has that story.
Roman gladiators are the focus of an exhibition in Italy that traces their history and legendary status. Intricately designed bronze helmets, daggers, and even the remains of their food are among over 150 relics on show at the National Archaeological Museum in Naples. The exhibition opened online at the end of March because of Italy's lockdown orders. But the measures are expected to be temporary and the exhibition is scheduled to run until January 2022. In the past, gladiators were at the center of a gigantic entertainment business, like today's most famous soccer players.
If we could attend a gladiator show today, the experience would be not unlike going to a football stadium.
The soldier's gear was a symbol of each gladiator's ethnic background and class. This extraordinary floor mosaic comes from an archaeological site of Augusta Raurica in Switzerland, the oldest known Roman colony on the Rhine.
The mosaic is very interesting. It dates back to the end of the 2nd century AD and probably decorated a private house.
It's about 700 square feet. It was discovered in 1961 and is being shown in all its splendor for the first time in Italy after recent restoration. Piece of art showcases the legendary fame that gladiators enjoyed all over the world. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
Remote school is taking its toll on the mental and physical well-being of children across the globe. But a 4th grader in Italy is enjoying a unique learning environment with help from her father's goats. NTD's Andrew Thomas has the story.
Every day, 10-year-old Fiammetta Mellis climbs up this hill in Caldes, northern Italy, carrying her pink backpack. This beautiful hillside is where Fiammetta's father looks after his 350 goats. She connects her computer to the internet with her mother's cell phone and follows her lessons far away from the classroom, like most Italian schoolchildren these days. It's a welcome distraction for her classmates and her teachers, stuck studying in their kitchens, bedrooms, and living rooms.
Sì, riesco a concentrarmi qualche volta.
Yes, I'm able to concentrate. And sometimes when there's a break, I show my classmates and my teachers the kids and the goats. I move the computer around so they can see the location because they're all from the city at this point.
Schools across Italy have been closed or partially closed since the start of the pandemic. So the family came up with a plan. On March 18th, they climbed the hill together to see if the internet connection and battery life would last. Fiammetta has been enjoying every single minute ever since.
I don't want to be stuck in an office all day. It's nicer to be out in the fresh air. I'd like to be a forest ranger with a horse. That way, I can keep my passion for horses. I can come and visit the goats. There will be a breeder or my dad if he still breeds them.
But life as the daughter of a goat herder is no picnic for this young girl. She wakes up at 4:30 in the morning to help her father tend to the animals. And while her classmates are still enjoying their night's sleep, Fiametta is catching the goats to help feed the kids. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
A world record set by a model train in Germany. It gives people a spectacular musical journey by tapping while glasses along its course.
This musical model train now holds a Guinness World Record for the longest melody played by a model train. It's at Germany's Miniature Wonderland Museum in Hamburg. Museum founder and model train enthusiast Frederick Brown spent weeks on this project amid the country's virus lockdown.
It's not all perfect, but just try to play Verdi with wine glasses, or even worse, the bolero, if you only have 2 octaves at your disposal. And that's why I say, this world record is a mega world record. It won't be beaten anytime soon, I'm certain of that.
The train can produce 20 different classical tunes, including those by Johann Strauss and Beethoven. It chugs along the track lined with about 3,000 liquid-filled wine glasses. But the construction work posed significant challenges for Frederick and his team. First, they had to set up miniature landscapes surrounding the train track, such as tiny versions of cities like Hamburg and Las Vegas. Another challenge was that water in the glasses would evaporate and cause off notes.
So we've been looking for solutions. We tried it with plastic wrap to cover the surface, and we found out that a light oil, very liquid oil, so not cooking oil or something, it's best to create a layer on top that preserves it, and then there's hardly any evaporation.
This is the museum's second Guinness World Record. It also boasts the world's largest model train set, with a total track length of nearly 10 miles.
A river in Wales turned white on Wednesday, but it's not caused by harmful chemicals. It's leaked milk. A milk tanker crashed into the River Dulais in Wales, spilling its contents and turning the water white. Eyewitness footage showed the milky white water flowing over a small dam in the river. The BBC reported that Natural Resources Wales said an unknown quantity of milk had spilled from the tanker, causing significant discoloration. Local police said the crashed milk tanker caused a road to close overnight until the tanker was removed. NRW said its officers would continue to assess the impact of the spill. And that's all for today's news. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Stephanie Cox. We have a new channel. Subscribe to us on YouTube at NTD News. Get the highlights of our news broadcast and the most important headlines that we curate especially for you.
Don't miss out on important news. Our videos are being deleted. So if you don't want to be cut off from honest news, take a moment to sign up for our newsletter at newsletter.ntd.com so you don't lose access to NTD. Go to newsletter.ntd.com to sign up for our evening newsletter.